The reason why we're having this conversation is because, Dr. David Hamlar reached out to me a little bit before Thanksgiving, right?
It's been a little while.
Yeah, and we had a conversation about doing blood drives for sickle cell, and I don't have at that point I've gotten a little bit more steeped in, but at that point I didn't have a lot of knowledge and understanding about sickle cell. Chris here is my friend. We've been friends for about 26, 27 years. So I know, he deals with sickle cell. But outside of that, it's just been something that I've been hearing about, but not really knew much about. And so, I know when we're having these blood drives coming up, I wanted to have an opportunity to, give people as much education as possible. I didn't want just the blood mobile to show up and say, hey, we here, come give your blood. We want people to understand why. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Why are you being asked to give blood? Okay? So with that being said, that's the reason for tonight's conversation. So the first question I have is for Dr. David Hamlar. And my question is, please explain what sickle cell is.
Well, I'll start off by saying when I approached Teto originally is that we wanted to extend it to the community. Mm-hmm. You've seen Red Cross in neighborhoods and everywhere, but maybe not our neighborhood. Right. And when Mr. Burroughs back here joined the board, he was intentional about coming on and making sure that message was felt. So I owe some homage to him and also for you for what you're doing. Sickle cell disease is a disease that affects primarily African Americans. From 100 to 125,000 of us are affected by it each year. Now, how's it gained? It's inherited. And essentially, if you have two parents who each have one set of chromosomes, and I'm not going to get too technical, but the point is, if you have two parents, there's a 25% chance that one of your children will have sickle cell. And what is sickle cell itself? Essentially, we have these little blood cells, and if you ever look at it, you can picture it in your mind, there's a thing called hemoglobin. And it's this odd little oval-shaped cell. And that cell is specifically designed to carry oxygen. If it has any shape other than the one that is intended, it's not going to carry that oxygen very well. It's going to be distorted. So when it gets into the finest, smallest blood vessels, it's going to get trapped. So some of the consequences are stroke. Some of the peripheral extremities will get choked off. Some of the fine organs in the body get choked off. So it's a devastating disease. And one of the manifestations is when little blood vessels get choked is severe pain. And I remember growing up, I had friends who sickle cell and they did not survive into their late teens. Are we making progress? Some, but there's a lot more to do. And that's why I'm proud of the partnerships here to work within our community to make sure we make a difference. So that's what sickle cell disease is. There's a whole lot more to it in terms of how it's inherited, how it's transferred, and how we deal with it. And I think we'll get into your questions on that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Hamlar. And this is open to anyone who would like to respond. I know you might have the answer to it, so I'll go ahead and ask. Possibly. If a couple that has sickle cell is planning to have a baby, should they be tested, and is it automatic that their baby would have sickle cell?
I will defer to Ms. Blaylark.
The first thing that I'm going to always ask is the clarification, do those parents have disease or do they have trait? Because that's going to impact the outcome. If they have trait like 1 in 12 people of African descent here in America do, then they are going to have that 1 in 4 chance or 25% chance. Not with all of their pregnancies, with each pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think a lot of people may not always understand, is that, oh, I've got 4 babies, maybe one of them. No, each and every one of those babies is going to be a roll of the dice. Now, if both parents have sickle cell disease, that is a sure chance that that child is going to have sickle cell disease.
Thank you.
So, and I don't know if Dr. explained this, but so you talk about the disease and the trait. What's the difference?
Well, the easiest way to say that is every human being has 2 copies of chromosomes. And if you have 2 abnormal hemoglobin genes, then you're going to have sickle cell disease. But if you only have 1 abnormal hemoglobin gene and 1 what they call normal hemoglobin gene, then you're going to have traits. So that means you're a carrier of it. You will likely have no outward signs, right? In very rare occasions might it show that you have sickle cell trait. But other than that, you may never know. And depending on when you were born, you may not have had a doctor that even told you that you have sickle cell trait. And we have an entire community out there who never had a doctor tell them that they have sickle cell trait.
Because it adds to it, and I just want to put this out. This just came out 2 days ago. Because of the need to know that information, the Red Cross is now going to be testing for trait. That hadn't been done before. It's making a difference in our communities to know who has and who doesn't have it, who's a carrier or not.
So tested for traits in hospitals with babies?
Well, if you're going to donate, if you donate blood, we're going to test that blood for sickle. So just like when COVID came and we started testing for antigens or antibodies and for COVID, we're doing that now for sickle cell. This could have been done years ago.
Now, is this going to be something that when people go to get tested, that's going to be a question that they fill out, or like, is there an application?
Demographically, if you come in looking like us, then they're going to automatically do it. But I think it should be open to everyone.
Yes.
Because you just don't know.
Yeah.
So you can actually live with sickle cell for a period of time and not know it?
Without question. So with trait in particular, a lot of the signs and symptoms are very subtle. And many times in clinical practice, you get to see how it presented when that person is stressed, be it through cold stress, trauma, loss of blood, and other physiologic stressors. Those signs are subtle, and typically when I would see that patient, they would be anesthetized. So they can't tell you that they're in pain. But you can look at a lot of hemodynamic changes, blood pressure, heart rate, amount of carbon dioxide produced, and you can detect that this isn't the normal picture. I will add that it is important to look at phenotypical features, how someone looks, but race is a construct. So many people can have sickle cell disease and or trait and not look like what you expect. So I would see that very commonly. You could have blonde hair and blue eyes and be sickling. In the acute setting, we'll see that. The importance of this group, which I'm very appreciative of, is it will provide tools so you can help that patient. And it's not necessarily at the point of care, but sometimes it's later for the long-term advice. You should stay away from cold. You shouldn't go to altitude. All these things that can make you sickle or trigger, unless you know, that could be a disaster.
And I do want to add that one of the great things that not just here in Minnesota, but every state actually has newborn screening, and sickle cell disease is one of the genetic tests that they do for every baby that is born. And it's not dependent on if that baby looks like you or me. It's all babies get all of the same tests. That in Minnesota started in 1988, where they added sickle cell disease to the newborn screening test. However, even though you could tell a baby had sickle cell trait, that wasn't necessarily disclosed because for so many years they saw no necessarily harm in having sickle cell trait. So it wasn't until 2015 that Minnesota adopted a sickle cell trait notification program. So again, we have an entire community, though you may know if your baby has disease, particularly if they were born after 1988 or if they've had complications. But so many people may not have any clue that they are carriers of sickle cell trait.
Wow. Okay. So, since I've been in communication with Dr. Hamlar and having conversations with James and Chris, there's been this talk about black donors, black blood donors. Why? You know what I mean? Like, what makes our blood so, important or better when it comes to treatment?
I'll start. So if you remember blood types, you have ABO blood types. That is universal, and there's a staging for that. What's more common, what's not. In terms of antigenicity, meaning what your blood will look like to a microscope or to a certain assay when they start testing blood. There's a lot of other surface antigens that are on there. And basically, if you take community who look like that community, it's more a like type fit. In other words, what I mean by that is if you take two black and brown people and match them up with all those little spicules that are on the outside of the cell, and we know what those spicules are with COVID nowadays, it'll identify more closely with those who are related than those who are not related. It's not that you won't get those on other races or other demographics, but the point is the chance of having that successfully match is a lot better. For example, if you take 25,000 folks who are white, and you want to find someone who has those exact antigens on the surface, it might be 100, maybe less than that. If you take 25,000 black or brown folks, it's going to be a lot higher match. So we have a more secure match, would you say, a more sensitive match that will relate to us. Because the more times you transfuse blood, and I'll let Sean get into that, more times you transfuse blood, the more reactivity you get.
Without question. So that exposure over time, you're getting exposed to those other antibodies, and that kind of looking for that mirror of an individual is an advantage, because to get those other surface antigens, those are the things that are going to trigger a transfusion reaction. You want to know that you're as close as possible, and to see those takes time. And in an urgent setting, you don't always have that time. So having pooled resources where we know this may be a benefit in this case without the additional screening is a tremendous advantage.
And I do want to add too, one of the major complications of sickle cell is stroke. There are not only stroke, but there's also multiple other reasons that a person may need a blood transfusion. So as you all said, the more often you are transfused, the more often your body is exposed to something that it doesn't make. You're putting someone else's in you, and you could develop those antibodies that are there for good reason to protect you. But even my son, who has had countless, we lost count when he was a child of how many blood transfusions he has had, there was a point that if he was in the hospital, there would be a delay because they would have to do additional testing, and they would have to even, at some points, look outside of the state for a match that was perfect for him. And so because of that, we have to keep in mind that sometimes blood transfusions for some are optional, but they're not optional for people who have sickle cell disease, are in a crisis, are in high-risk situations where they need to get a match as quickly as possible without the higher risk of the rejection and the transfusion reactions that can and have caused death.
So this is really informative, and I'm going to ask a really maybe counterintuitive of our discussion, but trust-wise, how do we know that the matches that we want to have happen are actually for those people and not for anyone else? Because I don't know if you guys have seen that Oprah Winfrey movie where Hema was just they used basically the cells that were in, I'm forgetting her name, but they were using those cells for other people and that family didn't get to benefit, but it was just a multitude of folks. And so how do we really know that the match that we're looking for is going to go to the right folks? What's the ethical piece of this that we actually, what are we doing?
I think that's an excellent question. You can direct donate if you have enough time to, let's say, a family member, but blood is a scarce resource. Think of blood, to go to the 50,000 foot looking down, it's like an organ. So this organ needs to be matched. Let's say we were trying to do a lung transplant for you. Blood is very similar in that regard. And knowing what it is exactly isn't always possible. That's kind of a luxury. The blood bank, because blood is a scarce resource, will limit where things go. Mm-hmm. They're going to take those rarer kinds of blood. David mentioned blood types, A, B, etc., O. Mm-hmm. Those will be put on the shelf. O negative is the universal donor. That will be given out more likely. And blood as an organ can also be divvied up into other parts. Mm-hmm. So because it's so scarce, we don't just give whole blood. In fact, we rarely give whole blood. We give components of blood. And those components have different likelihoods of having antigens, things that cause a reaction. You can't direct when you donate unless you've got that time, it's a family member. But what you can rest assured is that your special blood will be put aside and saved for that occasion when it's needed for that patient that has sickle cell trait or crisis or disease, whatever is required at that time. It's a scarce resource, so they'll divvy it out as needed. You cannot say it goes to one ethnic group or racial stereotype because that's a construct. When you look at blood, you can't necessarily tell what the person looks like. But what you can say is they're from this genomic line, and you can't always look at someone and say, oh, we're from different genomic lines.
I would also add that blood has a shelf life. And so depending on whatever component that they're getting from the blood, it's not that it can live infinitely, much like we saw with HeLa cells. And so even the value and the potency of that blood is really only going to last about 42 days if you're talking about red cells. And so there is a much more vigilant approach to making sure that the right amount of blood, the right type of blood at just the right time is being given to those who are needful of that blood, so that they are getting the best product possible to address whatever their health condition is.
So, I have to throw this in there. It sounds like, so if a person is sickling or having a crisis or whatever, so you just hook them up to an IV and give them blood?
Not always. There are other things that you can do to temporize, to give yourself time. You don't always have to transfuse, and that's because blood is a scarce resource. So there are a lot of things that we will measure to determine whether or not it's a trigger for a transfusion. I can't just willy-nilly give blood out as I see fit. There are usually triggering criteria: a certain hemoglobin level, blood pressure, O2 saturation. These are all fancy terms for how well are you delivering oxygen to your tissues. So if those things can't be met with all the temporizing things, oxygen, warming the room up, there are other things that we can give, then we will look to blood products.
And you don't want to over-transfuse. As a person living with sickle cell disease, you don't want to introduce blood to people, over-introduce it, because you will develop those antibodies, and it will be more difficult to find the matches that are perfect for you when you need it the most. So they are very careful.
And even if you don't give blood for transfusion, you may have to give morphine, because the pain is so extreme. So my daughter, when she was around 4, she had to go in, she had a sickle cell crisis. It wasn't necessary for a transfusion, but we had to make a decision as parents to give our 4-year-old daughter morphine because she was in so much pain over several days in order to deal with that pain. So blood is a option if it's needed, as the doctor said, but that pain is making sure that everybody gets taken care of. And a child's pain, and you're in a parent's eyes, you don't want that to happen. So for 7 days, looking at my daughter saying, okay, what do we do for you? And that pain had to be addressed. And I'll say this as well, and Ray can talk better to it. Sometimes as our kids grow and they become adults and they look like us, and we come in and say, I'm suffering that same pain, the biases of the healthcare system kick in and say, well, you sure you really need that pain medicine? Are you on drugs? What's your story behind that? Especially if you're, a black person sometimes as well. And that's something we need to talk about as well. Transfusions are great if you need to, but that pain medication and also to the ability to get it or not get it sometimes is an issue in certain healthcare systems, or all healthcare systems.
Have you ever experienced any issues with, at the hospital, whether you were in crisis or needing a transfusion, or anybody, treated you like you were there for, nefarious reasons?
So I'm originally from West Africa, Liberia, and all along I taught sickle cell because we don't have a lot of good doctors in hospitals. So I was under the impression it was rheumatism. until I came to Boston. I lived in Boston for a while. We had a doctor called Dr. Kenny. And I have the trait, but sometimes I get crisis with my trait. You know, sometimes it's dependent. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you stress, you get crisis. And I also have a daughter right now, 13 years old, who has the disease itself. So, yes, I had an opportunity to go down to Ennevor, and I was in a lot of pain. And, you know, the doctor came in and asked me what you need the painkiller for. I said, because I'm in pain, I can't sleep. And he said he was joking, but he told me, you are not going to sell those pills when I give it to you, right? And I said, no. I said, I'm in a lot of pain, so I definitely need it. So it's funny because we take a lot of vaccine in Africa, and my case were kind of different because I don't know if you're aware of beta thalassemia. I also have it in my blood, in my sickle cell. For years, I paid a lot of insurance because they couldn't figure out. My hemoglobin was a little bit low, but they couldn't figure it out. So I just paid until I finally found a doctor, and you know, he started doing some experiment, and I had to go back after some 15 years to lower my insurance because the thalassemia were causing a lot because it was the sickle cell and the thalassemia. Yeah. So for years I didn't play sport. And because of the sickle cell, I definitely wanted to play sport. I played soccer, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do a lot of things because the weather, I couldn't swim. Because when it gets less than 70 degrees, you just don't get in. Yes, you just don't get. And you have to avoid places with sometimes the AC is just too much. So that's a lot, and I'm really grateful. It's because of God that I'm still here. So I'm grateful that, you know, we can sit on a panel like this and talk about it. I mean, I do need all the information.
Well, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, and then I'm going to circle back to you, James, because you talked about having the lack of experts, sickle cell experts, where you grew up. And one of the things here in America that we really struggle with is having sickle cell medical experts as well. And why is that important? Not only is that important just from an empathetic and a compassion, but it's also important so that they know when they should be transfusing and when they shouldn't. And so often you will get people, maybe they're traveling and they go into an emergency room where that they don't normally go to. And if you get a doctor who doesn't understand sickle cell disease and doesn't understand the value of knowing when to transfuse and when not to, and not over transfusing someone with sickle cell, they may say, well, you're in pain, and the quickest way that we can fix that, let's get you a transfusion. And they may be introducing more complications because they just simply don't know or understand your personal case. Sickle cell disease is like snowflakes. On the outside, all snowflakes look alike, but if you could actually get them under a microscope, they're all very different in one way or another, though they have these common similarities that make them, that on the surface look the same. In the tiniest ways, they are actually different. And that's one of the hardest things about caring for sickle cell disease as a medical doctor, and I'm sure that our medical doctors can talk about that. If you get locked into a situation where all sickle cell is the same, all patients are the same, every complication is the same, you lose sight of the fact that every person is unique. And that is important because as you age out of pediatrics and go into adult, I call it the brown baby, black adult syndrome. And what happens is, as that young child gets older, when they're babies, you know, we cuddle and we want to care for them and, you know, keep the babies out of pain. But as they become older and as they begin to take on more attributes of what the media says is the black adult, there is a mind shift. There is a shift in how they are treated, and many biases, both known and unknown, begin to show up. And much of the worst time that it can show up is in the emergency room, in the admission room. I remember walking in, my son, the first time he went into adult care after he transitioned out, and he was in excruciating pain. We don't go to the doctor as soon as we feel pain. We go to the doctor when we can no longer manage it at home. And the nurse said to me, and he's crying, and I'm trying to console him, and before they had even given him any medication, the nurse said, "So did you give this to him or did his father?" Those are the types of medical bias. Those are the types of comments. That's the type of treatment that is happening all over, not just Minnesota, but Minnesota as well, in some prominent hospitals. And so we have to address that, but what we also have to do is make sure that we are keeping our we call them sickle cell warriors. We are keeping our warriors healthy, and so we are responding to their complications and medical needs with the expertise that's needed so that they don't have to go into emergency rooms, but also so that every doctor can be aware of what they don't know and understand their own blind spots and their own biases with this disease.
So have you ever had to ask for, so if your son is going to the hospital when he's in crisis and you felt like he had a doctor that was incompetent, I mean, did you ever have to say, can we get someone else, or did you have to even educate that doctor himself? I mean, what type of...
So what I would say is I've been in the medical system for about 17 years, and so I've learned how to navigate in different ways. And even on that occasion that happened with my son, when the nurse left the room, he whispers to me and says, "Just tell him who you are," right? He was like, "That'll change everything." And I said, "No, we're going to get your needs met, but I need to see what this picture really looks like." Of course, I walked out and I came back in and they were running from every direction, and I said, "You told them who I was, didn't you?" And so, but the reality is that, yes, there are times that I have accompanied either my son or other young warriors to the hospital, and I've had to say, "We would like the input of another physician," or I would have to make calls as the executive director of Sickle Cell Foundation of Minnesota, or I would have to write letters after the fact to address it. We're working on something as an organization so that people have a way that they can report their interactions with the healthcare system, so that when we are sitting at tables advocating for this community, that we can address with real lived experiences, not just mine, not just my son's, not just James, not just his child, but that we can take the experiences of individuals across this community and we can say, this is what's happening. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, we must address it, because not only is it impacting trust between our community and your medical community, but it's impacting their lives. It's impacting their quality of life, and it's impacting their longevity of life.
So earlier I was talking about, there hasn't been enough research done and you need research dollars. But American Red Cross is a huge organization with a huge budget. So are they just not intentionally directing money towards research?
Well, I made a statement earlier, it takes George Floyd to get people's attention. And there's been a lot of activity since then. So the Red Cross, and I will say this, is sort of a top-down organization. There's a national impetus for what goes on. This year, the Red Cross made it a point to put sickle cell disease as one of those entities that's going to make inroads on. Now, why? It wasn't just because of the strife and people on the streets. It was because it was something that needed to be done, was recognized, but we just didn't have the impetus to do it. Right now, the Red Cross is, if you have 100 donors out there, and you take people of color who donate, it's 2. We don't have a big surge in our population who wants to go give blood anyway. So that has to be an intentional objective of organizations like the Red Cross. There's others out there who want to seek those donators to be in the pool, so to speak. With the pandemic, that went down like 4-fold. I mean, for everyone, just in donations and everything else. So it's become critical, not only from the whole blood supply, but specifically communities of color. So what you thought was a ample supply for our sicklers, for our warriors, really dried up. And so now...
To that point, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
We need trusted messengers like you. We need trusted messengers like you. You have an audience that will listen to you. When you did COVID testing here, you're still doing it. People came to the barber shop to get tested for COVID, not because the doctors at Children's, the doctors at Regions, the doctors at Partners told them. No, my barber who's in my neighborhood, who I know, told me about that. So same with giving blood. Our community will come together and give blood if they have trusted messengers like you. Hey, come give blood. My daughter is 9 years old, cute as a button. I've been trying to get people to give blood. You know me. 30 years I've been up here. Nobody's giving blood. They're like, okay, well, James, can we do something else? Yeah, you can, but giving blood will help her and other sickle cell patients. She's been blessed. She hasn't had that many transfusions. I think 2 at most, but I think maybe 1. But other patients need to have transfusions on a regular basis, and trusted messengers like you are important. And to Ray's point about trait, I didn't know I had trait at all. My Teresa's mom, my ex-wife, Tanisha, didn't know she had trait at all. We found out while she was pregnant. So what I'm going to suggest to folks is something as well. Give blood. They test for trait. You'll be able to know going into your relationship, going into your marriage, going into whether you're going to have kids or not, whether if it's that 25% chance. And if so, you can still have a lovely family. You have a beautiful daughter or son. But the thing about it is you'll know going into it. We didn't know. And back when I was born in the 60s, my mom was funny. She was like, yeah, I told you had trait. So what did you tell me? Maybe like 6 or 7. I was like, Mom, I didn't know what trait was or sickle cell was. So, and I didn't have, this woman had, I played football, I played basketball. I've never had any complications related to the trait. No pain, nothing like that. So it affects each other, like those snowflakes, differently. So we need to know that we have trait. We need to adjust to that. But we have to have trusted messengers in the community, because if we don't, the Red Cross will spend as much money as they can, but if they spend it in the wrong places and spaces, it won't make a difference. So there's a reason we've come to you, and now we've got another barber here in Brooklyn Park as well to do the same.
And the thing is, it's intentional from the standpoint that money and dollars are invested. So it's not a 1-year plan, not a 2-year, it's a 5-year plan. So that we're going to triple the number of African American donors in communities, and all things are local. So what we do here in our community versus Atlanta, New York, whatever, is going to depend on us. So I think with our board composition, which is changing, any board of directors, you look around, you kind of say who's in the room. With the board of directors we have now, I think we're going to make a difference here in our community by reaching out.
I think it's important to also remember that it's not just about transfusion. So you mentioned your experience, which is crucial. You haven't declared to this point in time whoever that individual is, but all it takes is that one occasion where you go to altitude, where you go to the mountains and it's cold, and you happen to sickle and trigger. The healthcare system is very poor at managing pain, right? There's an opiate crisis. Narcotics, opiates are poor choices for occlusive pain. So anytime you sickle and you take blood supply from something and get chest crisis, pain in the extremities, narcotics are not the best choice. But you need experts who would come in and do regional blocks, epidurals. There are all these things that we can do, but you need to know to ask. It's very much like if you're seeing that ER physician who does not have experience with vaso-occlusive crisis, you need to get on the phone with the hematologist. You need to get on the phone with an anesthesiologist who understands that it's not just opiates. That's for the acute crisis, but for long-term, for a better outcome, for function.
That's why we need our ambassadors like at Children's.
That's exactly right. And we can't just soundbite medical education. So we can't just say, okay, he just said a mouthful, but we'll take this piece that says they don't need opioids, right? And then they apply that across the board, and now people are being denied opioids. I'm blessed to be able to be working on some state legislation around opioids. I'm blessed to be able to be on a board that is talking about transplants and transfusions. But it's also important that we as community members begin to take a step forward and lean in to more medical understanding. Everyone's not going to be a doctor, everyone's not going to be a nurse, everyone's not going to be a medical expert, but you can be more functioning in your knowledge of medicine. You can be more functioning about what's happening in my community around health. What do I need to know, not just for myself? Listen, I'm not having any more kids, but I have nieces and nephews. I have friends who are still having kids. What do I need to relay to them so that I can take some of my lived experience and I can apply that, or maybe I can't donate. For many years, I was, and I still am, extremely anemic. So I'm lucky to be able to donate when I do. However, I can organize, a community blood drive. I can say, let's do a ladies' day out and then go donate, right? I can be creative about ways to get my community to participate in these needs. And it's not just, this is a really touchy subject because it's really a catch-22. We know that we have a history in a lot of medical malpractice around how the Black community has been treated with research. However, the catch-22 is this: if we don't learn to navigate those research spaces, they will continue to do research without us, and then medicines and medications and treatments that we need did not involve people that look like us, have our phenotypes, that have some of the similarities and the differences. And so it's also understanding that we also get to a cure for sickle cell, not through the dominant culture, not through studying Caucasian people. We have to be able to better understand the people who are living with it, and that means we all have to participate in one way or another.
Great.
Thanks. So, you mentioned a lot of the benefits of donating. And so I'm just wondering if there are other incentives right now that are, I know, Teto, you're doing some work here where the incentive is community building, really. A place for people to foster community and talk and have those candid conversations. I believe that's an incentive. But I think also, what other incentives are there? Are there financial things where folks are being able to receive money or
the largest picture is community, what you talked about. And healthcare disparities overall are, I tell you, if you look at Minnesota versus some other states, especially southern states where you think it would be worse, we're right there at the bottom with them. So healthcare disparities is the winner overall, because if we get folks in our community at least enlightened about one aspect, it could be sickle cell, it could be high blood pressure, it could be gastroenteritis, it could be any ailment that we have. Those are the things that we need to direct that affect our community. But at the same time, if you take it down to a lower level, yes, we are rewarding, we're incentivizing people to come in and some of the bigger industries or companies in our community are backing that, like Target, Cargill. They're trying to help us in terms of monetary influence or incentivize to come in and give blood. Sure. Amazon. So there's a lot of things that are available to incentivize us to come. But in my heart and heart of hearts, if you want to do it, if you want to make a difference, it's in here. It's not what somebody's going to offer you, because then you become a regular donor. And that's what we're trying to build. There's an organization just south of here that I work with, and we're trying to incentivize philanthropy. We usually write grants and try and do things to encourage research and get researchers. But if we build it within our own community, I think we'll be more successful. Sure. And that's what philanthropy is for that organization, and if we start doing this at home.
Sure.
So that's where I think the win is in our community.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that there is nothing like Black love. Right? It's the love of self, the love of community, the love of neighbors. That's what's carried us for generations. So I would say that your why is your love for your community. Your why is that it goes back to that community, bringing it together. We may not always have a lot of money to put and to donate. We're gonna go to the big guns for that, right? But I used to use this saying. I worked in the blood banking industry for almost 10 years, and I used to say, silver and gold have I not, but such as I have give I thee. If I don't have this, what can I give? And blood happens to be one of those things that are invaluable. You can't buy good, healthy blood. And so by donating blood, that is something that we can give right back to our community. And because we know that making those matches is so important, we know that the likelihood of it going to someone who likely looks like us is much higher than it would be for the general population.
Now, we have two folks here who represent the community and are doing a lot of good work to advocate for better healthcare. And so I would ask even, what are the more incentives for them? You know, with their platform offering this, what else would we incentivize for them and other business owners here to be a part of this movement?
I think strong community, healthy community is strong community. I think that we have to be able to acknowledge that we can impact the strength of our community by becoming healthier. We are more resilient when we're healthy. We are more responsive to the needs of our own needs and the needs of our brothers and sisters around us when we are in a healthier state, mind, body, and spirit.
I'd say also to add to that, more so equitable partnerships. So I won't use incentives, I'll say equitable partnerships. So if American Express or whatever it's called now, Ameriprise, is having a blood drive, they're a big multi-billion-dollar company. They can shut down a couple of floors, let people take their breaks off, go down, have a big blood drive. Well, if I say, Teto, have a blood drive on a Saturday where your income comes and revenue comes that day, I'm asking you to tap into your revenue as a small business owner. So an equitable partnership to me is, does the Red Cross have to invest in Teto to say we're going to do something differently? We're not going to pay Ameriprise. We're going to invest in you and what you need to sustain your business, do the work of the donation, and also get the word out to the community. I think we need to do more of that, and then that will make a lot more people want to donate. And that's something that, I'll be honest, a lot of companies haven't done yet. And the Red Cross, to their credit, when we said that Dr. Hamlar and I said, let's do it that way, they said, okay, let's think about it, but yeah, let's do it, and invest in that. So I think those kind of partnerships will help in the end. And the other thing, too, is just keep communicating and talking about it. One of the things that people get tired of me posting my daughter sometimes about sickle cell is, I'm going to keep doing it and keep doing it, because it's not about her, it's about the kid in the family whose dad is not the vice president and chief equity inclusion officer at Children's Minnesota. I can get quality care by putting my badge out, and unfortunately, biases sometimes will be like, oh, that's James, he's in the C-suite, so we got to take care of his daughter. I don't want that. I'm like Ray said, I want you to just take care of everybody who looks like me, everybody who doesn't look like me in a high quality way. So keep doing that is important. And the other thing is too, I gotta say this is, we cannot let systemic racism stop us from doing what we're supposed to do. Is the system racist? Yes. Are there biases in healthcare providers? Yes. Are there things that get in the way in our community? Yes. But we can't stop pushing forward, because the health of our community is going to be so important that our young people, who are going to be the next Teto, the next Ray, the next Dr. Hamlar, the people up here on the stage, need us to step up now, because if we don't, we stay in the same system we've been in for many years. So I think that's the equitable partnership, is what I would call that incentive for folks like Teto and folks like you.
Pay me. Pay no.
I'm free tonight.
Dr. Hamlar, you brought some information that you want to share. So I don't know.
I did share it. And one of the things that we didn't talk at the top of it was, why is sickle cell? Why do we even have sickle cells? Because of Mother Africa. So when the cell sickled, it was because there was a bug called malaria, and everybody's heard of malaria. The folks who had malaria, just like any other system, whatever your beliefs are, there's a Darwinian theorem that only the strong survive. So those who had sickled cells and contracted malaria survived. So that's how we survived in the motherland. Did we need it down south? Maybe a little bit, back in the days when we were, not just slaves and sharecropping, because there was malaria down there. But as we've tended to migrate north into areas where there's less malaria, now that's a burden. So that's why we have malaria. That's why we have sickle cells. Now, at the same time, it's always going to have a push-pull, because even if you had sickle cells in a malaria area, you still had some problems. So is it something we need to get rid of? Yes. We need to do the research to get there. So that was primarily.
Do you think it's curable though, ultimately? You think?
You know, there's a lot of things, I'm a glass half full guy, and there's a lot of things I thought would be cured by this point. HIV. I thought that, you know, obviously we can control the disease, but it's not cured. And those are viruses, and here we got the pandemic, which is still changing as we speak. So there are a lot of things I think we can attack, but again, it takes that money, that effort, everything else. The only other thing I would suggest is that I think, as James alluded to, I think the Red Cross is sincere in this effort because it's a sustained effort. And people like you, if we're going to come in, are going to hold us to the fire and say, look, this is what I expect.
Absolutely.
That's why we introduced the fact that not all business can just throw out whatever and have a blood drive without having some loss of their own. So that's something that they have to wrap their arms around as a overall organization. Here in the Twin Cities, we're fortunate to have a CEO who's willing to take risk. And she has come in a house of fire trying to change some things, and I think we're going to have success with her. So the thing is that all things are local. So we're going to start being in the community. We're going to start trying to reach out and make sure people see what's going on. We started this effort a couple years now, and it's really making a difference. The only other thing I say is why blood donation is important. It's not just for sickle cell, although that's the focus here. When we have our black and brown kids, our wayward youth who are going into ERs all the time, we need blood to transfuse them. We need blood for folks who have cancer and need, you know, blood-borne cancers, lymphoma, leukemias, those kinds of things. They need blood. So we're still servicing ourselves by doing this and outreaching to our community.